Okay, and this week's podcast episode, the title is Winning High Value Clients, the Human Connection Advantage. And I'm so thrilled to introduce Doug Brown, CEO of CEO Sales Strategies and author of Win-Win Selling, and the creator of the Double Your Sales methodology, which is designed to help businesses and independent sellers grow their revenue in a reliable and measurable way. Doug has contributed to over 35 businesses, generating just under $1 billion in sales, and has worked alongside Tony Robbins and Chet Holmes, and with brands like Intuit, CBS, Procter& Gamble, and Enterprise Rent-A-Car. Doug, I'm so thrilled to have you on the show, man. I'm so excited. When we connected several months ago, this is a wonderful topic, and of course, elevates, particularly in the times we live in today. So thank you for being on the show, Doug.
Oh, Richard, thanks so much for having me here. I'm so grateful to be here.
Absolutely. So we'll get right into it, Doug. Segment one, let's talk about breaking the mold and why most pitches fail. And the theme here is most sales professionals sound the same: rehearsed, formulaic, and forgettable. To win, you must engage differently. So, Doug, many professionals believe that closing big deals is about having the perfect pitch or a well-known brand. In win-win selling, you challenge that assumption. What's the biggest mistake you see salespeople making?
Well, they actually are trying to, well, there's a couple. So the first mistake they make is they're not talking to their ideal right fit buyer. They think they are, but I mean, you're a C-level executive, right? And so if I want to, you know, in most cases, I would be talking to you as the C-level executive based on what we do, right? So if I'm talking to a director level or anywhere below your level, if you will, in the hierarchy, I'm likely not talking to the ideal right fit buyer. And I'm not just talking about title. I'm talking about what is the business return on investment and personal return on investment of the person that we're talking to, and does that match up with our value proposition?
Okay.
And most people, uh, well, let me put it this way: Harvard, Wharton University, Marketo, I believe HubSpot, and several others did this study, and they found out that 97% of people selling, either in full or in part, are missing part of their ideal right fit buyer profile.
Okay.
So, think about it this way: if we were, I don't know, looking for a mate in life, and we walked up to a lady and or those of you who walked up to gentlemen, we walk up to that other person, I'll use lady in this case, and we say, "Hi, I'm Doug. I find you very attractive. I would like to have 5 children down the line, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, blah, 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 blah." But this lady here's thinking, even if we're at a matchmaking meeting, right? Even if we're set up a little better, and this lady's thinking, no, 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 I don't want kids. I want to travel the world. I'm looking for somebody who, is, fun and spontaneous, and we can jet set to Belgium when we want to, or whatever, right? Whatever she's thinking. Like, that's not the ideal right fit buyer. She's not looking for a family in long term, or, maybe she's looking for kids, but, she wants to adopt, right? So that might be more of the ideal right fit buyer. So I just kind of want to demonstrate it sort of in that way. But it's really about business return on investment and personal return on investment, Richard. And so if we don't understand what their motivators are on both of those, what they want, what they need, what they fear, what they desire, then frankly, our pitch is likely going to be off.
Yep.
The
Agreed.
second mistake that people make when they're pitching is it's all about them. Let me tell you about why I'm great, why my product's great, why my service is great, and why you need it, and why you're not an intelligent individual if you don't actually agree with these points, right? It's one of those things that people just come in and they're trying to sell something versus building a relationship out of the gate to find out if indeed it makes sense for the person we want them to buy from us actually is a real fit for this process, and they launched too quickly into it. Um, and it makes me laugh because I remember early on in my life when I was just first met Tony Robbins.
Yep.
We were in a corporate environment, sitting at a table, all of us executives at a table, and we were in Las Vegas and we were doing a live event. And Tony asked this question. He says, "Guys, what makes me different than anybody out there doing the same thing?" And uh, and everybody went around, we went around the table. Nope, 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 nope. And I remember saying to him some line, I can't remember what it was. He said, "That's actually pretty good if we want to go into a corporate company, but that's not what makes me different, right? If you want to be a consultant, you got a great line there." He said, "What makes me different? What happens when I walk down the hallway of this event where people come up to me and they ask me one question? What's the question?" And he said, and I said, I raised my hand. I said, "Tony, they're going to ask you, may I tell you a story?" And he goes, "That's what makes me different than everybody else out there, because these stories are what people can relate to in their own lives, and they can see the return on investment they're getting in their own lives through other people's stories."
Yep.
Right. And so this is what we want to do as well. And this is one of the reasons that most people's pitches are off. They don't know their ideal right fit buyer profile. They think they do, Richard. I mean, you're in marketing, right? So
Yeah.
if your ideal right fit buyer is off on the marketing side and you go out and you spend a big budget, right? Like I remember we used to buy radio for Chet Holmes and Tony Robbins. And I remember us trying different stations, and one would be a barn burner, and the other one would be like crickets chirping, right? And the radio people, they're always like saying the same thing. "Oh, just spend $20,000 here, spend $30,000 here. We'll test it," right? That's kind of the thing. But the reality is, if the message is incorrect for the ideal right fit buyer, then you're off. You're going to have more objections, more stalls, more pushback, more ghosting, more all of that. And if your message is all about you, you're kind of like a lounge lizard in a bar at that point. And that's, you will hit some, but your points of response are going to be worse than you want them to be. And if you want to run the volume play, then keep running it that way. If not, fix the ideal right fit buyer profile.
Oh, that's awesome. A couple of points I'd like to unpack. Is the right fit buyer necessarily the decision maker, the ultimate decision maker?
It's the apex decision maker. Yes.
Say more.
Yeah, exactly. It's the person who reigns supreme and can say yes. It's not always the buyer. The buyer is the person who appropriates the funds, right? And so a lot of times people try to coddle up to the buyer because they think, "Oh, well, they got," but when you think about it in terms of banking. You have the banker that you meet on the front, and then you have the underwriter who actually makes the decision whether or not you get that loan or not. You want to get to the underwriter, folks, not the banker. The banker will always be like, "Yeah, sure, we can do this," because they get a commission out of it, right? The underwriter, that person who sits in a dark, dank building with no windows, crunching numbers all day long, you make that person feel special with the business return and personal return on investment. You make that person your ally, then you get the loan far more often than you will if you don't.
We're going to keep peeling back the onion because that is so powerful, Doug. And you said something which is a massive mindset shift. Your point is, and I don't have the exact words, but essentially what you're saying is enabling, um, you know, the other side, so to speak, quotes, to buy from you rather than selling to them. That's a massive mindset shift in the sales process. Say a little bit
Yeah.
more about that.
Well, the reason that most people don't do that, Rich, is they don't have enough prospects to talk to.
Interesting.
So I'll go back. I'll go back to the dating thing, and your audience maybe you're like, "No, not another dating thing," right? But um, so imagine we are trying to go out and find that perfect match for ourselves. And when we go out and find that perfect match for ourselves, we only have one or two people that we actually can date.
Yep.
Well, we're going to be a little more like, "I got to make this work," right? It's going to be one of those things. Our prospects are low in numbers, right? Now, if our prospects are too high in numbers and we're sorting through, that kind of like, I've got a lead, not even a marketing qualified lead. I really want a sales qualified lead or a sales ready lead, right? That's what I'm looking for in the sales process. So that's too much. But in between that, if you have 20, 30 people you can talk to on a consistent basis who are highly qualified leads, then you don't get such a needy, I got to close this sale.
Yep.
So massive prospecting, the master prospector always outsells the master closer, Richard. Always. Because the master closer is going to try to put NLP techniques and persuasion technique, like they're going to try to close it. But the one who has the abundance of sales qualified leads, that person there can build a relationship. And that relationship is to discover whether or not this is a win-win fit or not. And so when you come from that perspective, which I always do, I've walked away from, people think I'm crazy, but I've walked away from 6 and 7 figure deals that, we would have netted because it's not the right buyer fit. Even though they're like, yeah, let's try this. I'm like, no, it isn't going to work the way we wanted to work on our side. And I'm not going to do that to you. If you want other people to take your money and do that to you, fine, but that's not going to be us. And the weird part is not weird, strange, but the weird, wonderful part is a lot of times people will go, well, tell me why it's not the right thing for me. And then we can talk through that. I've actually had deals that I would have walked away from, take those deals and really be great client engagements because we talked about all of that up front. Right? It's like talking about like, hey, relationship, he's got kids, she's got kids, and how are we going to handle the kids if we get married and move forward, right? And who's going to be, the person that does X and who's going to be the person to let's get clear on that point so we don't have all this fight and contention going on after the fact. There are no bad clients, folks. There are bad decisions on the front end. That's what I've learned through my life, Richard.
That is,
So it's all about having the abundance mentality in the prospecting side, and therefore you won't get needy, and you'll be able to have those conversations.
that is so that I love that. I love that, Doug. And here's the point, because this is significant theme number two. And I think what you're saying here, in addition to, enable buying rather than selling, when you go to prospecting rather than a definitive kind of pipeline of potential prospects, the attachment to the outcome changes. And as a
Hmm.
C-level executive,
Hmm.
one thing I've hated is when I felt sold to. And rather than, as you say, providing options, understanding what my problem points are, understanding what's urgent for me, building the relationship, understanding me as a human being, all right, across all
Yeah.
realms of my life. And rather than being attached as a salesperson, attached to the outcome, you have provided options, but I've not felt sold. And that is a really, really powerful point because that's the biggest turnoff I found is, and you can tell when sales folks are just attached to the outcome, they just want to sell and they want to close the
Yeah.
deal rather than the other way, not being attached to the fruits of their labor, right? Providing, and you've walked away from deals, as you said. How powerful is that?
Yeah, when I was in the military and my friend Steve was in the military and we both got back from basic training at the same time. So imagine you're being locked away for all these years and weeks, right? And you get out and what do you want to do as a young 19-year-old soldier or Marine in his case? It's like you want to go find a gal, you want to just go out, right? And have a good time. You've been locked up for like 8 weeks or something, right? And you just haven't seen the outside world. And I remember going to this place, it was called Michael's, and Newburyport, Massachusetts. It was on the water. And there was this girl that Steve was very interested in. And there were a lot of girls, a lot of ladies in the place. And we were talking to a bunch of them. And this one he was interested in, he walks up to her and he says, hey, I find you very attractive. Could we have a meaningful conversation to find out if, this could lead to anything? And she goes, drop dead, loser. That's what she said to him. And because Steve had an abundance mentality, he looked at her and he said, I want to thank you. And she said, what do you mean? He goes, I'm in the United States Marine Corps. I'm putting my life on the line for people just like you to be able to come here and live a free life. And the fact that you are so rude,
Yeah,
I want to thank you for not having me waste any of my life's time talking to you.
yeah, yeah.
I appreciate that. I hope you have a wonderful night. And he turned and he just started walking away, you know. Um, I was watching this and she goes, oh, no, wait a minute. Whoa, 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 right? No, wait a minute. And she's following him and he goes, no, it's okay. Listen, there are probably other ladies in this room here that would actually not find me, repulsive and would want to talk to me. And maybe, maybe my future, you know, is in this room. I don't know, but I appreciate you not wanting to talk to me and waste my time. I appreciate that because, I could go in and he's laying it on. Like I could go into battle, in a couple of months, I could be dead. So I don't want to be spending my time with somebody like you if you're just that rude and indignant person. And she's like, and she's now coming after him, Richard. And lo and behold, it worked out, right? I mean,
Wow.
right? So I'm saying I'm saying this because don't be afraid to be the if you morally feel as a seller, folks, that you have a moral obligation to serve your client no matter what, and it's not the right fit, be the first to walk away. Be respectful, tell them why. Um, I walked away from a mayor of a pretty major city where I grew up in, and because the mayor was late to our appointment, and she wanted me to do something for her city. And I knew that if this is how we played the game right out up front, I'd always be chasing her around, and then this wouldn't work out for the city. I'd let the city down. I was born in that city. I didn't want to do that. I have a family reputation there. So I told her assistant, I said, look, when I walked in, they said, well, she's in a meeting. And I said, okay, great. I'll wait, but I'm only going to wait 10 minutes. So 10 minutes came by and I said, hey, uh, could you go tell the mayor I've got other people to talk to? And she said, no, I can't do that, blah, blah, blah. Anyways, I said, well, I'll wait 2 more minutes. At 12 after I walked up, I said, would you tell the mayor I do not appreciate being stood up like this. I'm a professional. I'm helping people to do this. I'm going to be talking to other cities and towns around this area and tell her I appreciate the fact that I had the opportunity to possibly have this deal go together. But I'm leaving. Bye. Now, Richard, about 3 minutes later, I hear Mr. Brown, Mr. Brown, right? And I hear the tap of high heels on the granite stairs of the city hall.
Yeah,
And the mayor is coming down the stairs and saying, I'm so sorry about this. I didn't mean to, right? I had never met this mayor. But the fact that I'm willing to disengage for the greater good of the relationship,
yeah,
there's just something that the universe delivers in that capacity, just like it did for Steve that night, just like it's done for other deals that, we've been involved in. And if it's not the right fit, you got to walk away. So you want to determine what the right fit is up front. Again, what is the ideal right fit buyer? Right? What do you what's good for them? What's good for you? When we go into these meetings, we want to be aware of that because we have to position ourselves as a professional just as much as the professionals we're trying to engage in, no matter what we're selling.
yeah,
And,
yeah,
and folks, if you work for like Home Depot, it's the same concept, right? It's if somebody wants, I don't know, weed and feed for their yard or something, right? And they're going to go down and do the wrong thing, and they're going to put it down at the wrong time and put it right, and it's just not going to work. Don't sell them the weed and feed. Tell them straight out, because if you don't, then you're not playing win-win. And it's a moral obligation, I feel, Richard, for us as someone who's selling. We are not selling to titles. We're not selling to CMOs. We're not selling to chief whatever. We're selling to human beings. And whether we title them mom or dads or, parents or school teacher or what, supervisor of whatever, they still have a life with feelings, desires, wants, needs, fears. And we have to take all of this into accountability. Otherwise, we're not dealing with the whole person. We're just dealing with a business transaction, which some people are okay with, but most people are not. They want the business and the personal side to get a return on their investment.
Wow, how powerful is that? And you had another wonderful golden nugget of a wisdom bite there, Doug. It's in all facets of life, not just selling. Sometimes you're faced with two choices. Is it immediate gratification of closing a sale, or is it, as you mentioned, for the greater good? And it's always better for the greater good, Doug.
Yeah,
Whatever way.
always. And you know what? It always works. Well, I can't say always because I'm not done yet, but in most cases, it's worked out for the greater good of all people. It's weird how when you're playing by this code, it works out. Maybe not as you thought. Like I remember reading a story that George Clooney actually wanted to be a professional baseball player, but he wasn't being accepted. Like the Cincinnati Reds, I think, turned him down and he was just having a hard time getting into baseball. Well, guess what? If he had been a professional baseball player, he probably wouldn't be George Clooney that we know today, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so there's all kinds of stories you can look at where people have had to say no to something. They say no to it, or they say yes, and it will take them down a pathway. Sometimes if we're not saying no to the things we know shouldn't go, we take ourselves down the pathway of uh-ohville, and that doesn't usually work out anyways. So it's just a philosophy for life, but it's applied certainly to the sales process.
So we're going to unpack getting to business return on investment as well as personal return on investment. So, and that's really about cultivating the relationship, all right? And I really want to unpack that because many professionals, be it sales or other functional areas, struggle with that. And so let's
Yeah.
talk a little bit about that. Prior to that, though, Doug, sales pitches often get ignored because they feel scripted. How can sales professionals shift to a more natural and engaging approach?
That's an excellent question. So, usually they're getting ignored because of the positioning coming in, right?
Yeah.
So, if you want to be less ignored, get more out into the public square. So, and what do I mean by that? Um, you may be able to validate this. I don't know if you do this or not because we didn't discuss this. But most people, before they meet with someone, like let's say I'm trying to come into your company and meet with you, most people will do a Google search on me, right? Maybe a LinkedIn search or whatever. Um, what's coming up for you as the seller? Is it, you know, you got one thing coming up or nothing, right? Or like if you search Doug C. Brown, um, and you just typed in sales or revenue growth, I'll be on the top 8 pages easily, right? And I'm not saying that to be braggadocious. I've actually worked on this to make sure that I'm in the public square. So if you're in the public square, it's harder for the human brain to go, he can't know what he's talking about because American Express put an article out with him. Forbes put an article out. He's been on all these podcasts. I'm seeing him everywhere, right? There's people who are writing good things about him. So that will give me an edge over other people in the positioning
Okay.
because it's building a relationship because we all want to work or be with somebody who's perceived as at least having expertise in something, if not an expert.
Yep.
So I'll illustrate it this way. This happened to me. So years ago, my eyesight was starting to get a little funky, and I was having trouble seeing distance. And so I'm like, I go to my optometrist and I go, listen, what about this thing called LASIX, right? I hear about this is good, right? And she's like, yeah, no problem. They lay you down, they use a laser, they cut off whatever she said, the lens of the cornea, right? And you're like lying there and you'll feel them cutting it off, and this is going on, and this is that. And I'm like, ugh, kind of freaking out a little bit internally, right? And I'm like, what if I sneeze, in the middle of it? Like, this is going to burn a hole through the back of my head or whatever. And she's laughing. She goes, no, 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 no. So safe procedure. She said, listen, I said, well, can you refer me to somebody? And she said, yeah, I've got two people. I've got one, he's done, I don't know, maybe 15,000 successful procedures. And he's a lot more money, but I have another guy who just got out of school, who I think is okay, who's done a few procedures, but he's a little less money. Which one do you want to talk to? So, Richard, if that was posed to you, what would you be thinking, right? Would you be thinking, oh, no, give me the guy who just barely got out of medical school? I don't even know, or I'm going to pay a little bit more for this expert, right? So, from my perspective, I was like, just give me the expert. These are my eyes. If they screw this up, I'm in trouble, right? That's what my thought process says. So the reason I bring that story up is because we all would rather deal with that person that is a perceived expert in the field. So if we want less resistance, we've got to do the work on the front end.
Yeah.
Because isn't it nice when, Richard, maybe you were looking for something, you pick up the phone and you call this perceived expert. That perceived expert is in a much better place because you're reaching out to them versus, hey, let me cold call Richard and see if I can get through the door, right? And then if I cold called you and you looked up after me, and you say, well, geez, that, I had a good conversation with the guy. I didn't know this guy could do this, and this and that. Then I'm in a much better position. So the resistance will get lowered. So it's about positioning.
Yeah.
Sales is always about positioning and alignment, positioning and alignment. And we do that through the whole life cycle of the relationship. And I've had the weirdest sometimes, Richard, where people are just like, um, it's funny. They'll go check me out. And then I get on calls and they go, I didn't know you went to Berkeley College of Music. And they'll bring that forth right up front. And because they think I'm this like fantastic musician because I got into Berkeley College of Music, right? And I'm not. I'm okay, but I was able to pass the test to get into Berkeley, right?
Mhm.
Now, I have degrees in biology, business, nuclear medicine. They never bring these things up. They bring up the like the Berkeley College of Music point, right? So you never know what they're going to cue in on. And this is why we want to get out in the public square, because the more we're out there, the more we are perceived as an expert. And people perceive me as an expert even in music when I'm not. But I'll get in the door a lot faster if I was going after a music company, for example,
Yeah.
than somebody who has no experience in that industry because they recognize the public square message. Is this answering your question, Rich?
It is. It is.
Because
No,
that
it's
would be
good.
my
It's an excellent point. I was definitely going to go down the path of, that positioning and even potentially thought leadership, but no, you've answered it. Nice job. Good.
thank you.
All
All
right. So
right.
let's talk about the power of human connection in sales now. So the theme here
Yeah.
is authentic relationships drive sales, not aggressive pitching. So you talk about dropping the script and leading with real conversations, Doug. What are some ways
Yeah.
sales professionals can create a genuine connection in the first 30 seconds?
Do your research and understand what's going on, and then start talking about what that is. Right now, that could be on a personal level. I just did this morning. I just texted a CEO of a company and I said, how's your day going? Because yesterday she had a really bad day in court. Right? Wasn't expected, didn't go the way she was expecting it to go. And so I just reached out to her and I said, how is your day, compared to yesterday, which was a complete, you know, bad show? How are you feeling today? Right? Great. Let's have a meeting. That's all it took, right? So you've got to, folks, we got to get prepared to understand that we're dealing with human beings. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to get so personal with them that, you're talking about all these deep, intimate details. That's not what I'm talking about, right? You don't want to be sitting there in a business meeting and the guy's talking about, how bad his wife is about XYZ, right? I mean, you don't want to get down that path if possible. But you do have to do your research. What's going on from the business perspective on the ROI? Why would Richard even want me in this office? What is he actually looking to achieve? What is the company going on? What is the economy doing? Is it affecting how Richard would perceive how he would be doing things from 2 years ago to today? Right? I mean, there's so much going on in our economy right now. I mean, we can all look at that one for sure. What is the company going through? What is the industry going through? What specifically has been put out on the company that Richard works for that might be public knowledge? We're looking for something that might matter. Now, we should already know this before we get to the meeting because in our first conversation, we should have been framing what we're going to talk about anyways. But once we understand the framing of what we're talking about, what within that frame is even more impactful that might make Richard go, huh, I want to hear a little more about that. So the test is if you say something from a selling point of view, whatever it is coming out of our mouth or whatever we put into our writing, the test is this. Is it making that person on the other side go, wow, I'd like to know a little more about that or a lot more about that, or so what?
Yeah.
Like I call it the so what test, really, when it comes down to it. If it's making that person go, yeah, so what? We provide great customer service here at ABC Company. Yeah, isn't that what you're supposed to do anyways? Like, you know, um, you know, uh, in the trades business, for example, they're notorious for showing up late, right? I mean, you want to hire a plumber or an HVAC company, whatever. They're notorious for running late, and their follow-up communication's terrible, even on the front end for most of these people. Please, no daggers sent to Richard, but the point being is, um, so if their message is something that you know is conveying we show up 5 minutes early guaranteed or we give you $2,000 on the spot, right? That's going to make somebody go, huh, tell me a little more about that, right? Yes, Richard, wind, hail, sleet, snow, doesn't matter, nuclear disaster, we will be there 5 minutes early, right? Or we will give you whatever, right? That would make somebody say, okay, I'll take the appointment, not just from the greed of getting $2,000, but from an insurance process. So I used to be in speaking of Berkeley, I also was a professional DJ because I realized that playing in clubs for 75 or $100 a night. Oh, look at you, brother. Yeah, you're equipment back there. I realized that I could get, $500 to $2,000 a night at that time being a DJ. So I was well accepted as a DJ in the New England area, and we did a lot of mobile events. But we used to do a lot of weddings and corporate events. I've done like McDonald's, Fisher Scientific, a lot of the big ones. But I love doing weddings. Those were one of my favorite things. Or 50th anniversary parties, Richard, because I always would go up and say to the bride, "What does it take to be 50 years together happy?" And she would go, "Oh, he's got a sense of humor and he makes me laugh and he does this and I got that." Then I'd look at the man and I'd say, same question. And without fail or hesitation, they will always say the same thing. She's always right. So,
A smart husband.
yeah. So, so I used to work through agencies to get these jobs, and we were we were not the least expensive agency. To do a wedding, I was about somewhere between 2 and 3,000 US dollars at that time, which was really on the high end side. Um, and no matter what, if the agent paged me, called me, whatever, no matter if I was even in a meeting like this, I would excuse myself, probably not on a podcast, but in a meeting, I would just say, can I have a couple of minutes? I would pick up the phone and I call the bride or call the corporate client. And they would, now this was within seconds or minutes of me getting, like within a minute of me getting. And so I would call up and they would always say the same thing, Richard. They would go, wow, I wasn't expecting you to call this fast. And I would say to them, well, man, you're putting on your annual corporate event. I would assume that that's important to you and your whole company. Is that right? Or, hey, this is your wedding, right? You know, and they would say, yeah. And I'd say, well, I'm sure all the other DJs that you've contacted, they're doing the same thing I am. So, and they would literally say this, hell no, no one's called me. And I'd say, well, that's kind of wrong, don't you think? I mean, this is a really important thing. I mean, you're representing your company, your maybe your reputation within the company might be, judged on this thing. And, maybe you could get a bonus that comes out of this, or you could get that or whatever, right? Business return, personal return.
Yeah.
Everybody getting this, I hope.
Yeah.
And they would say to me, yeah, that would be really cool if I got a bonus out of this. So I said, well, then, um, well, if you like this kind of service on the front end, wait till you see what you get when you hire us.
Love it.
We closed over 99% of the
Wow.
clients that came through
Wow.
on that call. It was a one call conversation because what used to happen was I'd say, well, great. Then they'd go, yeah, I think we would like to hire you. I said, well, then why don't you call back the agency or I'll get them to call you. And they go, no, I'll call them right now. And I'd say, okay, great. Well, let's set up our first appointment together. And so I'd schedule something right then and there. And they would call the agency. And the agency thought, they were literally calling me back and they go, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing? Right? It's a simple follow-up courtesy conversation, right? But it's positioning me differently. So now when they go to the CEO and say, hey, CEO, I just hired the most professional guy on the planet. This guy got back to me within seconds. He knew exactly what we were looking for, what we were wanting. This is going to be an amazing thing. And by the way, look at his bio because we used to have all these, people who would, rate us on cards or send letters or whatever. I got this whole thing that was sent. This blah 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 blah. Great, you did a really good job. I really appreciate you being here in this company, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that was the difference, the positioning. So what are you all doing to put yourself in that position? Because when you do, we're now dealing on the human to human level.
Yep.
And so we're dealing not only on a business level, but on a personal level. And the more your job at that point as a seller is to become so connected and revered within that person, the CEO, and every other person along the line, as well as the company. And the reason you want to do this is for kind of selfish reasons, Richard. You're a CMO. You might get a better offer at another company, but if I'm your guy and you go to the other company and that other company needs what I can do, you're going to call me most likely first.
Yep.
And when you call me, it's not going to be a conversation of, Doug, come in and prove yourself. It's going to be like, look, I got this going on. What's it going to take to fix it?
Absolutely.
And or what's it going to take for us to gain the opportunity? Or what's it going to take for us to reach our goal? And now we're having a conversation of conversion, not a sales conversation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Doug, is there a place, I mean, in that early conversation, humor, curiosity, and insight? These are powerful engagement tools. How can professionals use them effectively without coming across as forced?
Well, again, so I have a strong desire about follow-up, right? Um,
Yep.
and so I teach follow-up as well as I built a SaaS automated personalized meaningful follow-up system that automates follow-up. And one of the questions that are asked is very similar, or if not the same question, is how can I follow up without being pushy? Statistics show that about 57% of people who are expecting follow-up want helpful follow-up, not a pitch. It's no different than what I believe you asked this question. How can I be? So, what is going to be there that's going to be helpful that they care about? And if we have a helpful, caring, value-based message that they care about, the rest sort of takes care of itself, Richard. And but too many people don't figure out what that is. I call it the real it, right? And once we understand what that is, you're now in rapport. And so now the whole idea of being in rapport is to continue to build trust. The higher the trust level, the quicker the sale. The
Absolutely.
higher the trust level, the quicker the relationship comes together. It's it's just human nature. And remember, folks, we're not selling to titles, we're selling to people. So I don't know if that answers your question in full, Richard, but if not, please ask a
It does. It does. And you've mentioned the big T word, trust.
yeah, trust.
How do you cultivate the trust?
Stop selling and stop selling and and help these people. All right. There are three reasons why people buy. Okay. They want to solve a problem, they want to gain an opportunity, or they want a goal.
Yeah.
Right. So if we first must identify what that is. Now, people are weighing in their mind what they got to do, i.e., spend money or whatever, and that what's important to them about getting that problem solved, the goal resolved, or the opportunity seized, right? They're weighing constantly on, let's say, on one side, we've got like a lever, like a seesaw, right? On one side of the seesaw, we have fear. The other side of the seesaw, we have buying confidence. We, as the seller, must do everything to lower the fear and improve the buying confidence. How do we do that? We look at the business return on investment, the personal return on investment that they're seeking. Well, I don't know that up front, Doug. Well, then ask questions to uncover that. When you find out what is important to them, and you can just simply ask, how important is that to you? Like on a scale of 0 to 10, 0
Yeah.
meaning could care less, 10 meaning, yeah, that is like as important as the health of my children, right? They'll give you an answer. Now, if they're like, I ain't telling you that, well, guess what? You don't have rapport. So you're just building a relationship. Rich, so many people are like they're out there saying, always be closing, always be closing, always be closing, right? No, 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 no. I call it R bar. Always be building a relationship.
Beautiful.
Relationships bridge that fear and confidence buying gap. The stronger the relationship, we've all done this. We've bought off people that we absolutely like, even though, or have the relationship with, even though we felt someone else might even be more qualified. We just do this as human beings. And so why not be that person that has that strongest relationship based on that criteria? Looking at a business return on investment, personal return on investment, promote the things that do buying confidence and don't promote the things that push fear. It's it's right. And you will occasionally stumble, folks. We all do. Uh, I still do. I did with my wife the other day. So she let me know. And so when you stumble, you go back to human thing and recover and build a relationship. That's what we do. there's no difference between this. But people, they say, well, I'm going into a sales opportunity, so we got to have this blah, 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 blah. Yeah, there is a formality to it. You can't just walk into Richard's office and go, yeah, what's up? High five, high five, right? It's like, it's too much. But you wouldn't do that to a stranger on the street most of the time, anyways. I might, because I'm a little out there when I do things like that. But the point being is we generally won't do that with somebody that we're trying to do a formal relationship with. Um, Now, if Richard and you and I knew each other, you know, 4, 5, 6 meetings in, and you said something brilliant, I might go, "Hey, high five, brother," and just like put it up there, and you might, but because you're comfortable at that point, hopefully. But there is a formality to it, and we got to follow that formality and the structure, right? The structure of what are we looking for as a seller? What is the buyer looking for? And that match has to happen. I mean, we're looking for budget, authority, need, timeline, right? That's called BANT in the industry. And I say the BANT 3C, right? So we're looking for those, other things in there. Do they have any competitors, for example, that I might have to talk about, right? um, you know, uh, and so on and so on. And there's other parts of the framework. But the point being is we're still dealing with human beings. And too many people forget that. And they position themselves as the underling versus positioning themselves as equal to or the expert of. And that's where people, it all breaks down because who wants to be dealing with a non-expert if they can deal with an expert?
Absolutely, absolutely. Doug, a lot of this, I'm an executive coach as well, and one of the things you learn in executive coaching, very similar to the sales process, is deep and active listening. In
Mm.
the sales process, Doug, how much, if you were to weight the two between talking and listening and trying to kind of uncover those gems of needs and urgency and all the things you mentioned in the prospect, what would you say? How much should a salesperson listen versus talk?
8 or 9 to 1,
Wow. Big.
right? Because people love to talk about themselves and about what's important to them, Richard.
Yeah.
Our job is to ask the right questions.
Yes.
And then, the old adage, you got 2 ears and one mouth. So, why
Yeah.
not listen twice as long as, just so it's important to listen. Now, it doesn't mean you can't talk and you can't have a conversation, but we still want to be actively listening because what we're looking for is that little nuance within the conversation, right? And when you hear that nuance and your spidey sense goes up as the seller or as an executive coach,
Yeah.
you got to dig in there because that's the thing, right? It's like when somebody says, you know, no, I don't want that. And they're shaking their head up and down, like, yeah, like, yes, right. But they're saying, no, I don't want that, right? It's like, wait a minute. You want to dig in on that. And what I mean, dig in, not interrogate the person, but just go into that direction to figure out what the reality is. Because if we don't figure out what the reality is and we're too focused on making the sale, then we miss the obvious things, and those things result in buyer's remorse down the line.
Absolutely. And when you listen actively, Doug, you know the next question to ask. Not you don't advance, you don't prepare the question in advance and think
Yeah.
about the person talking. But naturally, if you're listening very deeply, it will come to us to how you continue to move the conversation along to some outcome or some solution, you know?
Yeah. And folks, don't be afraid to take notes too. Have a notepad, like write down things, right? Because that's another thing too. Like, Rich, people go, well, geez, well, they think I'm distracted. It's like, no, they want you to take notes,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah.
what's important because you've got to be able to reference back to these things. And the cool part is when you take notes, you now have follow-up material, right? That you can use. And you should be following up with people the moment you leave the building, if possible,
Absolutely.
right? And so the the interesting thing about, and again, this is all about building trust, right? So um, most people, when they leave a meeting, they wait way too long to follow up with that meeting. And folks, do you think you're the only one that just walked through that building that Richard's going to talk to on that level of decision? It's not like Richard's buying a pack of gum. What do I want? Raspberry, strawberry, or mint? I mean, do I want Trident or I want another brand or whatever, right? It's not a hard decision for well, I don't want to assume, but most of the time for people, it's not a hard decision. But when you're making the decisions you're making, and again, I just did a trades conference. That's why I keep bringing it up. Um, I literally called 21 people, sent the same message to them, Richard, which was, I'm going to be installing central air in my home. Here's the square footage of the home. Here's the type of construction thing. I got to make a decision like within the next 7 days because I've got to travel to Europe and and all that stuff. And out of 21 people that I called and left a voicemail message for, none of them called me back. Then I went to their websites, so as many as I could find. I think it was 15 of the websites that actually had a form on there. And I typed the same message. Out of those 15 or 16, 3 people got back to me. Then I said, well, why don't you come over? 2 out of the 3 actually showed up. And out of the 2 people, I said, great, tell me what it's going to cost. One was like $42,000 or something, and the other was like $35,000. And I'm like, this air conditioning. What do we, like, it's like, I'm not trying to buy a new car. I want air conditioning, right? But I realized, okay, this is kind of the going price. And then I said to them, listen, I'm going to Europe when I get back. Could you please follow up and send me, let me know because I'm like touring all over doing speeches and all this stuff. Long story short, nobody got back to me. Not one person. So then I was talking to another person and they just said, why don't I just sell you for now? Because it's getting into July, right? If they're going to do this, they can't install now because they're so busy anyways. Why don't I just sell you some window air conditioners and we'll throw them in the house and we'll help you put them in the house, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, how much? And they're like, I don't know, it's probably going to be like $6,000, $7,000. I'm like, okay. And I ended up buying window air conditioners. Why am I telling this story? The people who would have gotten $40,000 never built the relationship. This person who just introduced the room air conditioners, I still talk to this person today. I still have the same room air conditioners because what I realized is, hey, this did the job,
Yeah.
right? So the point is continue to build the relationship because he's not only sold me window air conditioners, he sold me windows, which we then put into the house. He's been back and done additions onto the house. I mean, this guy, just because he consistently builds a relationship, has probably got something like $70,000 in sales, all from building a relationship. So if no one takes anything else, or that's terrible grammar, if we don't take anything out of this conversation other than build a relationship for the long term, no matter what, then you're going to struggle because you're working too hard and you're only looking at transactional selling versus the life cycle of the potential buyer and or client. I literally have had people like you, Richard, leave one company, go to another company, then I worked for the first company and then I did this job with the second company. And then you got a $500,000 bonus offer and another company wanted you for twice your salary and you go to the next company and they brought me along into that. So instead of me picking up, say, $100,000 or something, now we picked up over $500,000 just from the other engagements, right? zero cost of acquisition on my side.
Yep.
And we're still friends and buddies, and they've introduced me to other people and things like that. So why not extend the relationship through the relationship? And it all begins with the beginning of that conversation that you first started asking me at the beginning of this podcast.
Absolutely. Wonderfully said. All right, last couple of minutes or so. Let's talk about winning high value deals through Doug's playbook. All right. Two or three questions more, and we'll do this is a quick round, okay? If a
Okay,
sales
speed
professional is
round.
currently struggling to break into high value conversation, what's the first thing they should change in their approach?
First, they're well, that's a loaded question, but the I might say the way they look at high value selling, right? Because it might be a mindset issue for people, and I have found that to be. And I don't like the word mindset, but it's just kind of like when you're getting rejected over and over and over and over, it's like this doesn't work, right? It's because but number one, start with the right ideal, right fit buyer. If nothing else, that's the first place always, always, always to start. It's usually the place that people don't want to look the first. But start there. Make sure you're dialing it in appropriately and make sure your messaging is reflecting what they value and perceive as value. That's the key. And if you're not, then you're going to have a hard time struggling. And make sure you're talking to the right person.
Okay. Is that the same answer for what's the one key takeaway from win-win selling that every business leader should remember when engaging with potential clients?
Um, no one's going to throw you out of the top floor window if you ask a question and they say no. So be prepared to ask the questions that actually make people think differently. If you're competing like out of the three C's, right? Competitors. If you have competitors in there and they're wowing the clients with their questions, and you're not, you're going to be positioned as a lower value, right? If you're wowing them with your questions and they're not, you're going to be perceived as a higher value. If no one's wowing them with questions, then they're going to get all commoditized and they're going to start going to convenience and price.
Understand.
So ask the tough questions, ask the questions that others don't dare to ask. I have done this. I'll illustrate it. I had a CEO that I knew wasn't going down the right path. They kept going on the right path. They've been doing this for years, and they keep bringing other people into their company to try to solve this challenge. And people will just do what the CEO says. And so while I was talking to this CEO, he said, "This is what's going on. This is what I believe the reason is. And we've been trying to solve this problem for years." And my question to him was this, Richard: how long have you been lying to yourself?
Wow. Wow. That's
Okay.
a good one.
Now, that might be a bit on the edge for some people, right?
Yeah.
But he said to me, "What do you mean lying to myself?" I said, "Sir, you've been telling me this, this, this. 1 + 1 + 1 isn't equaling 3. I can see it. Can you?" Right? Not in that attitude, but I can see it. Is it a possibility that you're just kind of pushing this aside because there are either other priorities, or it's something that if it blows up, you don't look good over, or what might it really be? And do you really know in your heart of hearts that this is not working and you keep trying to do the same thing, but you're denying actually doing what's necessary to get done? Now, I will tell everybody it takes a little bit of backbone to do this, right? But here's the thing. I'm there to serve this person, not to sell this person. Because if I take the job and I do the same thing as the other three people who came into the job, I'm number four and I'm getting commoditized into, oh, they're just one of those people who take my money and run. So I ended up getting the job, by the way. That was So you've got to ask the questions, and they don't have to be confrontational, but they've got to be something that makes somebody think differently than they're thinking today. You know, well, we've got a close rate of 25%. That's really good. Should it be higher? Right? How do you know it shouldn't be 32%? It's like we got to ask people, think of state break in this thing. You ever see this happen, Richard? Like a little child, they fall down, they scun up their arm or knee or whatever. There's no one around, and they just get up, and like you could tell they got hurt, right? They fall down, ow. You can see a little grimace on their face. They get up, they look around, there's nobody there. They're just like, they dust themselves off, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But if a little child falls down, scuns their knee, and then the mom or whoever comes over and goes, "Oh, that little child starts to wail away." So we've got to get people to think. Now, when the child wails, everybody turns and goes, "Oh, what's going on?" Right? We've got to get our people to turn their head and think differently. One minute they're eating a sandwich at a picnic, and the next moment they're focused on this little child and the safety and benefit of this little child. Now, maybe this is not the greatest analogy, but the point being is you change the focus of the people eating the sandwich. And we've got to change the focus of the people that we're talking with in a positive manner to get them to think, wow, tell me more.
Yep.
And if we don't do that, we're going to struggle in our conversations.
Absolutely. Wow. Well said. Okay. What's the one actionable piece of advice that listeners can implement today to improve their sales approach?
There's, well, firstly, understand your right fit buyer. I'm going to keep coming back to that, right? But the, you know, follow up is very easy to do. That's another thing. Start writing down questions, and this would be a good one. Take the questions that you do today, go to people who are either buyers that you know or people that are in that market target you're looking for, or people who didn't buy from you, even better, and say, could I have some help? I'd like you to evaluate my questions. You'll be shocked at how many people will help when you ask these questions. And then it's like, well, question number one, yeah, that doesn't resonate with me. Right. Right. So and just like in marketing, Richard, you'll put something out, you're going to test it. Salespeople don't test.
Hmm.
They just, well, that didn't work. Hell, I'll just change my approach, right? And that's okay because eventually you find it, but that's a long path. Why not take what you're going to be saying, test it with a real market, find out if they're really going to accept it, let them beat up your stuff, and then you make it better. So, there's so many things that we could pull out of this, but test, 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 test. I mean, it's in the testing that you figure this out. I don't know about you, Richard, with the leadership, but with me, a lot of times I'm going into companies and I'm telling the exact same thing. I just had one just yesterday. They're like, man, you're bringing stuff up we knew we had a fix for 2 years, but we just didn't. And it's like, okay, so every one of your employees has been saying the same thing, but you didn't take that to the thing. I'm a different outside entity looking in, and now it's like, oh yeah, we've got to fix this. So everybody get outside their own entity and let other people fix your stuff because it's a lot easier, right? Really, when it comes down to it. But there's so much that goes out. I would say listen to this one over and over and over and over again. Start pulling all the nuggets out of it. You're a great interviewer, and I really appreciate that. And I think that the questions being asked and the information being discussed between us is so important for people to listen to numerous times because they're going to forget about it 24 or 48 hours from now, right? They're going to forget 50% of what they heard unless they reinforce it. And that comes from who was the German philosopher? There was some German philosopher. I think his name was Herman. Herman Ebbinghaus, if I remember correctly. This gentleman actually was like the first guy who studied memory retention and whatever, and he discovered that people forget 50 to 80% of the information within 24 hours unless it has reinforcement. So that's why I'm mentioning this to people. Go back through this and then pull out the nuggets. And there's several nuggets in this thing that they can capitalize on.
Fantastic. Doug, this has been tremendous. Where can listeners find out a little bit more about win-win selling and learn more about CEO sales strategies?
Well, we run a master class twice a month. It's a 90-minute training. It's free. If they want to come to that, that's at ceosalesstrategies.com/stop the leak.
Wow.
And people go, why stop the leak? Because we talk about the leaks that are happening, right?
Yeah.
So, and the number one leak that's happening and how you can recover from that quickly. They can, if they want to know more about me personally, probably just type in Doug C. Brown
Yeah.
or revenue growth, or LinkedIn is Doug Brown 123. They can send an email directly to me at Doug at CEO Sales Strategies, plural, .com. And I also have a podcast called the CEO Sales Strategies Podcast if they want to listen to that. But you know, if they want to read the book, go to winwinsellingbook.com and you can just order your copy of the book there. The book's really good, actually, Richard, not because I wrote it, because other people tell me it's really good. And by the way, even with the book, Richard, before I published that book, I went to people and I said, would you read this and tell me what's really good about it and what I should change? And they did. And so I'm demonstrating that I do the exact same thing that I'm telling people to do. When you're running out a new initiative, do the same thing. Folks, you can find out if it's going to work before you go dumping all your resources, time, and energy and money into the process.
Basic stuff. And I love the comparison you made between, the marketing folks who pilot and experiment and, fail fast and all this good stuff. And yet we don't do it in sales. So thank you for that. That's a very powerful nugget. Doug, thank you so much. This was superb. Wow. Some really powerful nuggets. And I completely endorse what you just said. I think I listened to this a couple times, two, three times, because there's some really, really good stuff. Oftentimes I found that, sales folks, they're not building the appropriate relationships or the deep ones. And that's where you feel as though you've been sold. And that's never a good feeling. So well done. Some great, great points there, Doug. So thank you for that.
You're welcome, Richard. Thanks for having me on here. I really appreciate it.
Take care of yourself now. All the
You
very
too, sir.
best to you.